Hello and welcome back to my channel, where on this video I'm going to talk about my to-read pile for February of 2022. And I just came off of a very productive reading month where I read 22 books in January, and I had planned on 14. So it gives me a little bit of a sense of how many books I can put on my pile. But I also want to acknowledge that in the month of February, it is shorter than the month of January. And it may not seem like 3 days is a lot, but in my reading world, it's actually quite a bit. So I wanted to make sure that my list is reasonable. And what I'm also going to do in this video is engage in my alphabet reading game, TBR game, which is basically to choose a random letter of the alphabet and then pick 5 titles off of my Kindle that start with that letter to add to my list. But first, let me begin by sharing what I have on my list. These are items that I have from the library for the most part that I wanted to focus on in February, and I'm gonna run through each one in kind of a random order. I'm actually just gonna go by page order in terms of what I'm gonna be focused on this month. So the first book that I have on my list is a book called Layla by Colleen Hoover, and it is just shy of 300 pages. Colleen Hoover, or as Bookstagram tends to call her, Coho, is an author that I've never read, and I see her talked about all the time, especially with people who are romance readers. And so I actually picked up a couple of her books to check out because I've never read her before, and she seems to be getting a ton of great kind of feedback and reviews from people that I follow on Bookstagram. And February is Valentine's Day month, so I figured I'd pick up a couple of romances and just try them out. I don't know much about what this book is about. I think it is about a man and a woman who are in a relationship, and something happens to the woman. She has some kind of accident, and this kind of changes the trajectory of their relationship. I haven't done a deep enough dive really into the plot of this to really know much more about it. But I went ahead and picked this one up. I think I have it on Kindle. It was on sale, and so I'm gonna go ahead and read this one. The next one that I have on my list, also just shy of 300 pages, is The Children of Men by P.D. James. And this is a book that was made into a film. I have not seen the film, not that I remember at least, and I've never read the book. I have read some of P.D. James' other works, more in the kind of mystery genre, but my understanding of this book is it's more of a post-apocalyptic novel in which basically the human race kind of faces extinction because children have not been born for about 25 years. And I think it's due to some kind of illness or plague, but I don't know much more than that. So I'm excited to dive into this one. I think it's really quick and short. I do have it on audio, and I figure I can kind of check that one off my list relatively quickly. The next 3 books that I have on my list are really due in some ways to what was available to me from the library. I went ahead and picked up the next 3 books that are available in the Gamage series that I started last month. So last month I read Still Life. The next 3 books in this Louise Penny series are A Fatal Grace, The Cruelest Month, and A Rule Against Murder. I wanted to be able to find some of these on audio, and they just ended up coming in at the library kind of more quickly than I thought they would. I don't have a copy of A Fatal Grace. I have some books kind of later in the series, and so I picked up A Fatal Grace in physical copy from my library. So I'm actually going to try to get through all 3 of these relatively early in the month, just because of what's due back in terms of my audiobooks. And this is a series that has 17 books. I wanted to get through all of them this year, so I'm going to do a bit of a binge read in February and see how far I can get, because I know I'm going to have to read more than 1 book a month in order to get through this. So I figured I'd kind of make that a little bit of a front load in terms of getting through some of these books so that I can maybe read 1 book a month later on in the year. All right, the next book that I put on my list is one called Once Upon a Wardrobe by Patty Callahan. And you may remember, if you watched my January debrief of my TBR, that I read a book that was based on childhood series Anne of Green Gables. It was Marilla of Green Gables. Loved it, thought it was really wonderful. Well, Once Upon a Wardrobe is also connected to another childhood series that I read, which is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And in this book, you have a character who basically approaches C.S. Lewis and asks questions and kind of wants to find connections about The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I think she's asking on behalf of her brother. And I think this is a bit of kind of a fantastical story that's meant to give you some background on the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe series, which is a very kind of magical and fantastical series about a group of children who enter into another world through a wardrobe. And so I don't know much about this book. I kind of stumbled across it in my library and thought it would be fun to pick up. So looking forward to reading that this next month. The other book that I found at my library, a little over 300 pages, is a book called Lock In by John Scalzi. Now, I have not read a lot by John Scalzi. This is an author actually that my partner really enjoys. He wrote a very popular book called, I think, The Red Shirts, that is basically a Star Trek based book. And Lock In is about, it's kind of I think it's tied a little bit to the pandemic. It's about an illness that people are experiencing. And I think they have this experience of being like locked into their bodies. Again, I don't know very much about this book. I picked it up because it was relatively short. It looked kind of interesting. I've heard a lot of really good things about John Scalzi. I think a lot of his books, because they're focused on like Star Trek or they're pretty like in-depth sci-fi, it's not exactly what I would pick up. And this one seemed a little bit more on the kind of side of the spectrum where I might find it interesting. And so I went ahead and picked this one up. I also did pick this one up at the library because it's his most recent book and I thought my partner might enjoy it as well. And I figured why not read it if I'm bringing it home anyway. Okay, the next book that I have on my list is actually another Colleen Hoover called Regretting You. I have no idea what it's about. It was one of the ones that was available to me in my library, so I just kind of grabbed it. Because I had heard about this author so much on Bookstagram, I just kind of like picked a couple random books that looked like they were available to me. A lot of her books are hard to find, so because they're just so popular. So it could be that I've picked the ones that are like the least popular because that's what was available. But I'm looking forward to trying it out and again, just kind of trying this new author and seeing what I think. So I'll have to tell you at the end of the month debrief what this book was actually about. Okay, this month I also picked up Interview with a Vampire by Anne Rice. This is about 350 pages. I've never read this, and I added this to my list at the library just to kind of see how quickly it would come in because Anne Rice recently died, and I wanted to pick up this book, which is one of her most well-known works. I think it's kind of a multi-generational story that takes place over even hundreds of years. It's about vampires, and I feel like it's kind of the original vampire book before we got things like Twilight in a more modern period. And so I'm just kind of curious to read it. There's a whole series behind it. I don't know that I'm going to continue with the series, but I really do like to read books that are adaptations of kind of major motion pictures or kind of cultural phenomena. And when I saw that she had died, I definitely wanted to pick this up and take a look. So I'm going to go ahead and listen to that on audio this month. Okay, the next book that I have on my list is one that I also saw kind of floating around Bookstagram. It's called A History of Wild Places by Shay Earnshaw. I also don't know much about this book. My understanding is that the general plot is there are some people who are at kind of a commune that's a little bit off the beaten path, and there are some people who go missing in this environment, in this community, and there's some kind of like investigation of the people in the community of where they went and why they went missing. I really don't know much other than that about what this is about, but I've just seen it in so many places that I went ahead and picked it up. I also found this one on audio from my library. The next book I am picking up is a little bit under 450 pages. This is by Jenny Bayliss, and it's called A Season for Second Chances. I saw this book floating around the holiday season because it does take place around Christmas time, and it is about a woman who has ended a very long relationship of, I think, 25 plus years, and she's going to a town by the ocean and kind of starting over a little bit. So I think it's a woman who's kind of in midlife trying to figure out her next steps after the closure of a relationship. I definitely was drawn to this over the holidays just because it has kind of that holiday theme, and I wanted to read it kind of close to the beginning of the year because of that. We're still kind of close to when that Christmas holiday season was. And this was when it was available to me through my library because it just took a while to become available. It's a very popular book that I've seen a lot of people talking about. So I am definitely influenced by Bookstagram, by the things that everybody's talking about. Sometimes these aren't even the latest reads. It's just like a trend that everybody's looking at something I think the Colleen Hoover example is a perfect one that I just keep seeing a name or a book kind of repeated over and over again, and I want to pick it up and know what it's all about. So this one definitely falls into that category. Okay, the last couple books on my list are the longest ones, and then I'm going to turn to my alphabet game to pick out my next 5. So the next one is the next book in the Wheel of Time series, The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. This one is about 600 pages. I do have it in hard copy and on audio, and I am super excited to dive into the next piece of this installment of the series. I have really tried to not understand much of what is going on in this in terms of like what I know before I start the book. I don't do a lot of research about what's happening in the plot. I think I'm a little bit afraid of spoilers because there's just so much out there right now about Wheel of Time because of the TV adaptation from Amazon Prime. And so I want to be a little bit careful about what I'm reading. So I'm kind of going into these books a bit blind. I don't really want to know what's going on with the plot. And then I just kind of, if I have questions or I'm confused, I ask my partner because he knows these books in and out. So I imagine that this is going to be a bit more of a quest narrative. That was what was going on in the first book, but I really have no idea. I really did enjoy the first one though, and I'm excited to listen to the second one. And the last book that I have on this list that I've been curating is Stephen King's The Stand. Now, I think I'm into a bit of like a subgenre about pandemic related topics. Like I think The Children of Men is a good example of this. And The Stand is about basically a plague. Like it's a plague narrative, and it's a bit lengthy. So I actually added this to like my monthly goals to get through this book because it is over 1,300 pages. It has been quite some time since I have read a book of that length. And I do have it on ebook, physical copy that we own, and audio. And it's probably going to take all of those to help me get through this. That said, there are quite a few books I've read by Stephen King that I really have enjoyed. I really liked Dolores Claiborne, for example. I haven't really gotten into his horror or his sci-fi fantasy very much, but he's such a prolific author, and I'm so interested in kind of his story of being an author. I loved his book on writing, and this is just one that I thought would be fun to pick up. So that is my curated list of what I'm going to be reading in the month of February. And next, I'm going to go ahead and open my Kindle to prepare for looking at my alphabet game and what I might want to be reading from there. So I have my jar of letters, and I can't tell you how fun this is to kind of like randomly pick a letter and then figure out what I'm going to read off of it. I'm actually really excited to see what is going to come off this list. So here I am going to pick my letter. And let's see what I get here. I have picked the letter F. So let me see what I have on my Kindle that starts with the letter F. And typically what I do is I start to browse a little bit and just kind of see what I find that kind of draws my attention. And I typically pick 5. I've only done this for 1 month in the past, so this is still kind of a new game for me, but those are the general rules. So I'm going to take a glance here and see what I am finding. And this includes on this list both fiction and nonfiction, so there's a bunch of different things that I could potentially choose here. Okay, and the other thing I'll mention too is because some of these things got added to my list a while ago on my Kindle, I don't always know what they're about, so I can't always explain what exactly it's going to be, but I will give you a bit of a sense of what I know, if anything. So, okay, the first one I'm seeing here that I'm going to pick is a book called The Feather Thief, Beauty, Obsession, and the Natural History Heist of the Century. This is by Kirk Wallace Johnson. I first heard about this book on a podcast that I follow, and I believe it's called, I'm trying to remember which one it was. It's a podcast called Read or Dead. It's part of the Book Riot podcast. And they talked about this book at length, like years ago, and they loved it. Like they just raved and raved and raved about this book. And it's basically a heist story, and I don't know much more than that, but I'm really looking forward to seeing what all the buzz is about, because apparently it's just incredible. So I'm going to go ahead and say that is on my list. Okay, this is an easy one for me to pick. I am going to go ahead and pick The Fifth Season, which is the first book in the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. I have never read an N.K. Jemisin. People love her. I have been wanting to read her for an incredible amount of time, and super excited that this one is falling under the F category. I know basically nothing about this series. She has several trilogies and series that she writes, and I've just heard that they're incredibly well done. I've had friends who've said they just binge them. They're so, so good. So, okay, definitely adding that one to my list. I am also going to add another book that I've seen floating around that people seem to love, Final Girls by Riley Sager. I've also never read a Riley Sager, but I've been collecting his books on Kindle because everybody talks about them and says how amazing they are. I don't know much about this one either. I think it's basically playing off of the idea of the Final Girls trope, that there are, in like horror movies, there's like a final girl who survives the killer. And I think this is a book where there's many final girls coming together in some way, and then something happens to them, they're getting killed off. I don't know. I will have to update you at the end of this month, but Final Girls by Riley Sager is one that I've been looking at for a long time. So definitely want to pick up that one. Wow, there are so many good ones on here. I'm like scrolling through all of them so I can make sure that I'm not like missing any that I think would be really good. There's a lot here that I'm interested in. Okay, this is going to be hard to narrow down. I think I'm going to pick as a next one a book called Finlay, Donovan is Killing It. This is a mystery novel by El Casimano. I have also heard a ton about this and know virtually nothing about the plot. I've seen that there are sequels. There's clearly some kind of series associated with this book. But I really don't know anything about what it is like about. So I'm going to pick that one. I think it's relatively recent. And I think that was my fourth book that I'm picking on this list. All right, still scrolling through, seeing what my options are. Okay, I'm going to pick a nonfiction book next. I am going to pick a nonfiction book written by one of my favorite mystery authors. Her name is Val McDermid. She has a book called The Place of Execution, which is one of my favorite books of all time. I think it's incredibly well done. It's one of her standalones. I would highly, highly, highly recommend it if you're a mystery fan. It's definitely a backlist, but so good. She also writes a series about like a forensic psychiatrist called Tony Hill, and Carol Jordan, who's a detective that I love. I'm caught up on that series. It's wonderful. So Val McDermid, huge fan. She has a book called Forensics: What Bugs, Burns, Prints, DNA, and More Tell Us About Crime. I'm like fascinated already. I'm fascinated by the title. I love the fact that this is a novelist who is writing this nonfiction book. And I've had this on my list for quite a while, and I'm really curious like how her voice as an author comes through in nonfiction. I've never read nonfiction by Val McDermid. I've only read her fiction. So I'm gonna have that round out my fifth pick. I could easily pick out 5 more. There are so many books on this list, but I'm gonna limit myself to that. So when I look at all of those together, I haven't even counted this up. It looks like I have like 13 or 14 on my original list, and then I'm adding 5 more. So we're talking 18 or 19 books that I'm planning to read in the month of February. And I guess that means I better get started. As I record this, it's the first day of the month. I'm definitely going to wind down tonight by reading something on this list to kick it off. I would also love to hear what you are reading in the month of February. I hope you will note something down in the comments below. And also make sure to check out my January debrief if you haven't had a chance to yet. If you want to see my January TBR video, you can also check that out as well. And looking forward to updating you at the end of this month on how all this reading goes.